The counterculture of the 1960s resulted in a social schism of huge magnitude, the effects of which are still firmly ingrained in Western culture. The movement challenged the societal presuppositions that had reigned supreme for a very long time, some for the better and others for worse. Today, we're going to talk about that worse, or at least my perception of it. But before we do that, let's provide some context. You'll find some timestamps below in the description box. You see, the counterculture was greatly concerned with the rights of underrepresented groups. This was made evident by the civil rights movement in the United States and also the gay rights movement that spread throughout the Western world. Out of the ashes of the counterculture began the diffusion of the New Left, and with that, a term known as political correctness. As the teenagers of the 60s became adults, political correctness began to propagate. It penetrated the school, the university, the broadcasting station, the law firm, the bank, and of course the legislator. With it, it brought a set of new societal axioms, ones which challenged just about everything from gender roles to the nuclear family, sex, drugs, music, and most crucially, public opinion, or in other words, that which was deemed acceptable or not acceptable in the eyes of our newly enlightened society. If we analyze today's politically correct society, what we find is that there is a huge emphasis placed on outcome as opposed to principle. Instead of assessing why something is the case, or the intent behind that particular claim, we make snap judgments based on outcomes we don't like, and simply try to forbid that outcome. I would submit to you that by focusing on outcomes which we don't like, we begin to unveil a dangerous rabbit hole. The perfect illustration of what I mean by this lies in Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, A Clockwork Orange. The film is an adaptation of the book by writer Anthony Burgess, and it tells the tale of what happens when you force a product of nature to be run in a mechanical fashion, as if it were clockwork. Its main character is a teenager called Alex DeLarge. Despite his charm and good looks, Alex is a vicious murderer and rapist. He is a truly reprehensible human being who has no regard for the harm which he inflicts upon his victims. Later in the film, he is caught and put into prison, where he becomes the subject of a new medical experimentation which is aimed at reducing the crime rate and rehabilitating prisoners. The treatment is called the Ludovico treatment. Now, as part of this treatment, he is shown many ultra-violent films, whilst being made to feel physically sick. This means that when he is confronted with a potentially violent altercation or sexual temptation, he is brought to his knees and made to feel physically sick. This form of torture is used to subdue his violent and immoral tendencies. Now, to begin with, I'd like to steelman the argument in favour of the Ludovico treatment. I will attempt to make this argument as strong as I can, and then take it from there. The society in which A Clockwork Orange is set seems to be a sort of dystopian England. Criminality is rife, ordinary citizens being in genuine danger of harm across a variety of different means. A new government has been formed with the primary goal of reinstating law and order. The first thing we need to illustrate in favour of the Ludovico treatment is that if criminals were made subject to it, society would be entirely free of crime. Now let's let that sink in. Crime would be eradicated completely. Is that not anything short of a miracle? What's more, people are allowed to more or less live their lives freely. They're not imprisoned, they can work, contribute to the economy, have a family, take their kids to Sunday league football. Meanwhile, there's no murder, rape, assault, nothing. We are free of all guilty acts. Is that not worth fighting for? Is that not worth all of us making significant sacrifices for? In my view, the fundamental issue that this argument hinges upon is a series of questions. What is man? What is his purpose? What does it mean to be moral? Do the answers to these questions lie in rational and logical thought? The answer of this film is clearly no. We know this because the primary opponent of the Ludovico treatment is the prison chaplain. He argues that
The question is whether or not this technique really makes a man good. Goodness comes from within. Goodness is chosen. When a man cannot choose, he ceases to be a man.
we can see exactly what he means whilst the results of Alex's treatment are being shown off on stage. A man confronts Alex, slaps him, throws him to the floor, and forces him to lick his boot. Overwhelmed with feelings of sickness from the treatment, Alex is thrown to the floor and has no defense. He has been stripped of his ability to stand up for himself. He has been warped and has become a machine of sorts. Is this what morality looks like? Where all members of humanity are being thrust into a corner like a set of scared puppies and physically barred from taking one's life into one's own hands? Where we don't sin by virtue of sickness rather than inner strength. This is not morality in my view. A Clockwork Orange is clearly an existentialist film. It's a study of what happens when you revolt against the notion that the individual is a free and responsible agent who determines their own development through acts of will. Now I'm going to jump elsewhere for a second. There is a reason why the word Israel, the very place which the Jews view as their homeland, means he who wrestles with God. Why is this? That's what morality is. Something which is to be contended with. Morality is a perhaps infinite sum of levers and dials. It's a process of pushing and pulling, a process of creating, building, smashing and destroying. The walk with God, whether you choose to interpret it metaphorically or not, is nothing less than an everlasting metamorphosis of the individual. To put it simply, it's a journey where one invents and reinvents himself in all that he does. From your work to your relationships, your character, your values, everything. To strip a man of his choice and ability to mold his own principles is to strip him of his very humanity, no matter how grotesque that humanity may be. Someone who does not commit a crime through coercion, be it through the Ludovico treatment or simply through fear, is not virtuous, but a cripple. To paraphrase Jordan Peterson, virtue is a tamed monster, and I believe that's true. To bring this back to the woke left, as your humble narrator, I would say the following. The world is full of injustice and corruption. There are definitely some bad people out there who have little care for the well-being of others. Similarly, there are many people around the world who are discriminated against for their group identity, and this is nothing short of a tragedy. However, we must not try to change this through some sort of big brother who watches and corrects our every move. Or at least, we cannot do so if we wish to still claim that we are human beings in the process. Morality comes from within. To solve any kind of systemic injustice, oppression, or discrimination, you cannot just storm the Bastille and burn it to the ground. You cannot control the masses with the aim of digging up every ounce of tyranny, injustice, and oppression. We must encourage individuals to find the light within their own lives, rather than to enslave them with ours. Morality is something which can only be built upon in layers as we go through life, as we challenge ourselves and embrace the many experiences and opportunities that life affords to us. By encouraging a society which leaves people incapable of thinking, pretty soon we may end up having no thoughts at all.